Hello and welcome to the Sunday League podcast, brought to you as part of our UK NFL Fantasy Football Network. I'm Samit Paul and I'm delighted to be joined by TSL's co-host, co-creator and co-commish, Jack Cowlin. Jack, how's it going, bud?
Yeah, all good. Exciting week ahead, isn't it, with the draft coming up? So nice to get our teeth into something quite meaty in terms of the NFL world. And it's exciting times to see what teams are going to be doing.
It most certainly is. So before we get stuck into today's podcast, I just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who listened, subscribed, liked and engaged with our first episode last week. We had some great feedback and hopefully you continue to enjoy the podcast moving forward. So Jack, today's pod is focused on the upcoming 2026 NFL Draft and the rookies that will be joining the party in the new season. We'll analyse what they bring to the table and which are the standout talents that are primed to make a big impact from a fantasy perspective. So let's dive straight into the mock draft analysis, and we've based this draft day and rookie discussion on Fantasy Pros' consensus mock draft, but more importantly, we ran our own TSL mock draft in our WhatsApp group to get our participants' thoughts on how they see the draft playing out for their respective teams. Now, as Jack mentioned last week, we're not college football experts by any stretch of the imagination. I think I've probably watched more curling than college football in my lifetime, if I'm honest. Shout out to all the curling fans out there. So we're essentially applying logic and hopefully imparting some form of wisdom and advice for you. So Jack, barring an absolutely wild shock, I think it's fair to say that Fernando Mendoza is going to be the first name read out by Roger Goodell on Thursday. Fantasy Pros have him down as an absolute lock at 100% chance of being the number one overall pick. Now, you mentioned this last week, which got me thinking. The Raiders have obviously brought in Kirk Cousins this offseason as well. So is Cousins going to be the starter for the Raiders to start the season at least, which in turn may well limit Mendoza's fantasy appeal in a sort of short-term pain but long-term gain situation? How do you see that situation playing out, and what does it mean for Mendoza from a fantasy perspective?
With a lot of the reporting does seem to point, doesn't it, that Kirk is going to start, which is sometimes surprising. But then you forget, like, Mahomes wasn't an instant starter, and sometimes giving them half a season, a full season, or whatnot, sort of learning and such, isn't the worst. But then what we've seen of Kirk in the last, in his time at the Falcons was so bad. Where part of me just thinks, would you really do that? Is it not just going to potentially tank another year, and especially with a fan base that has been put through the ringer somewhat already. So I don't think when it comes to Mendoza, I don't think it takes too much shine off his stock in terms of, obviously, with Dynasty, and if you're looking longer term, he's clearly a really high prospect. But he's not a elite of an elite quarterback in terms of prospect. I wouldn't say, he doesn't seem to be in comps with the best throwers that have come out with sort of your Joe Burrows and such. He's clearly not as dangerous on the feet as some of the runners and such that have come out as well. So he seems to be a little bit more mid-tier. I think I've heard quite consistently that people feel as though a ceiling could be top 12, those early teen sort of level, which is obviously still fantastic and good enough to do really well for a team. But I don't think he's going to be a fantasy prospect, which is, going to have a huge ceiling. But it will be interesting, as I sort of say. I think if we're a couple years in to a dynasty, it might make you consider where you pick him a little bit more. But I think, as if you're sort of doing your first draft this year like we are, I think he'll probably kind of go similar sort of stage, regardless if he's going to be an immediate starter.
Who do you think stands to benefit the most from the changes that the Raiders have made and are going to make? Because the two names that obviously stand out for me are Ashton Genty and Brock Bowers. The Raiders will naturally believe that they're upgrading in the quarterback position from Geno Smith last year. You've got the addition of Tyler Linderbaum at centre. Is it mainly Genty and Bowers for you that stand out? Is there anyone else there?
Yeah, I think at the moment, isn't it? I think that they're clearly the sort of key weapons there and such. And I think it's a little bit, you kind of got to see it before you can really believe it, and sort of see who else is going to come. But you'd think that there'll be a little bit of further offense sort of planning from them within the draft as well. But I think it's primarily those two for sure, the ones that you're most intrigued by. Because, as I say, Cousins hasn't shown us a great deal. But again, when you're going to get such a lion's share of the targets or such a high share of the plays and such, that those two are, I don't know if it matters too much for your quarterback, because the output's going to be there one way or the other.
Moving on to the second and third picks, the consensus mock draft has Arvell Reese going to the New York Jets, followed by David Bailey heading to the Arizona Cardinals. Interestingly, our TSL mock draft has those two flipped around, with Matt taking Bailey to the Jets and Taj selecting Reese to go to the Cardinals. The fourth pick is an interesting one for me, as we've got the Tennessee Titans selecting Jeremiah Love, both in the consensus and TSL draft, courtesy of Oaksy. Now, this one would be a big one for Cam Ward in terms of making that offense more dynamic, upgrading on Tony Pollard, I believe, who is currently placed in top spot on their depth chart. And then with that run threat, obviously comes the ability to open things up down the field. And I think for me, the obvious other benefactor here is Wan'Dale Robinson, getting open in the short passing game and the long game. So I see this being a good thing for both Love and the Titans. It's a good fit. You add another threat to their offense. If it is to be the Titans, I know there's been a bit of talk sort of suggesting that the Cardinals might be interested in him as well. How do you see Love as part of that offense and as a rookie fantasy player and a dynasty asset in general?
Yeah, he's going to be huge. He's I think it makes all the sense in the world for the Titans, doesn't it? So I think they obviously need to keep upgrading their offense. Obviously brought in a few players, certainly at wide receiver. So Tony Pollard's okay. Again, he's okay. He'd be certainly better number two. You can envision him in that sort of David Montgomery sort of type role and such. But I think they've also got obviously their new stadium opening up a Titan, and just sort of having those marquee players is huge. And whilst there might be other sort of useful players for them, for their roster, I think kind of going and get someone who's got that sort of star quality that Love does just seems to make all the sense in the world. I don't see Cardinals. They did a bit in the market, didn't they? With who did they bring in? Tyler Algier and I think somebody else at running back who escapes me at the moment, and then have got a couple of other people already on roster. So I couldn't really see them going for him. Again, a lot of people think Jeremiah Love is the number one sort of player in the whole draft. So again, unless it's just a case of somebody who's just really won over by that, but Dynasty, he'll be huge. A bit like we saw with Ashton Gentry last year. He was certainly going first round picks in lots of leagues and such. I think Love will have similar sort of traction. I think people, again, the age, the immediacy in terms of going into that number one role. And I think Tennessee, I heard somebody say that they could be, like the Commanders and like the Patriots and sort of really have that leap up, as it were. I don't know. I don't know if I quite see them doing that with the current roster, but I think now that they've got the coaching staff they have, and hopefully you could really see sort of a steady climb back to being a really competitive team, which will be interesting.
It will be, and you've obviously got Brian Daboll over there calling the shots on offense, so it'll be interesting to see how he gets on as well. With the fifth pick, we'll see the New York Giants on the clock. Now, this is very intriguing, not just because it's the Giants for me, but Fantasy Pros consensus gives it a 40% probability that the Giants will select Caleb Downs, with Carnell Tate and Spencer Fano both sitting with a 20% chance. Andrew, in our TSL draft, went with Tate, which got people talking. Now, of course, if it is Tate, that's another dangerous weapon for Jackson Dart. It also takes the pressure off Malik Neighbours when he returns from injury. And you'd like to think, from a Giants perspective, that will hopefully open things up for him more as well, with defences having to focus on another dangerous target. The Giants also added Darnell Mooney and Isaiah Likely this offseason, and I'm looking forward to seeing what our new tight end in particular adds to this team. You'd imagine with that deep field threat, that opens up lanes and gaps for Cam Scatterboo and Tyrone Tracy Jr. as well. But if the Giants decide to bolster their defense instead, one that already boasts the likes of Brian Burns, we added Tremaine Edmonds in the offseason, Abdul Carter, Kayvon Thibodeau if he doesn't get traded away. We obviously saw Dexter Lawrence get traded this past weekend, which we'll discuss further when we get to the 10th pick. That's already a really serious defensive unit for me, and there's a lot of buzz over them already and potentially going down the defensive route, with Sonny Styles also being mentioned. What do you think of Tate being on this offense, though? And do you see the Giants looking elsewhere here and perhaps targeting a wide receiver at 10 instead?
Yeah, it's kind of Tate. He seems as though he's the clear number one wide receiver. Again, like you said, we don't watch a lot of college ball, and the difficulty for me is always on this when you are going on podcasts that you listen to or other YouTube clips and videos and such, but he just continually from all the people that that I sort of respect and sort of listen to from various platforms, he just seems as though he's far and away the number one and such. So yeah, that'd be really interesting. You know, he's obviously a tall wide receiver. You know, neighbours can go up and fetch anything. So you can just imagine the sort of threat that having both of them on would be incredible. It's an interesting one. I don't know, like if Jeremiah Love was there, obviously you being a Giants fan, I'm presuming you would have Love over Tate in terms of if they're both there at 5. Would you go running back over wide receiver, or do you like the Scatterbo Tracy sort of pairing, or sort of I don't know. What would you lean towards if you had the choice of both of them?
I do like the Scatterbo Tracy double acts, but I think, and Joe Shane, the general manager, sort of hinted at it as well. I think it's a case of you take the best name on the board. So if Love is there by some sort of miracle, I think Giants should take him. Just take the best player on the board.
Yeah, and that's it. And as I said, I hadn't even really considered Tate, because I think in most of the sort of mock drafts I've seen, or sort of people, I think I've seen a lot of Giants. Yeah, if Love was there for some reason, then people are mocking him there, or it would be a Reese or a Sonny Styles or someone of that nature, potentially going there at 5 again, sort of best player on board sort of territory. So it was really interesting when it was put into our mock draft, as I said, because I just hadn't seen it before, and as you sort of say, it kind of got everyone buzzing a little bit. And it's just so funny how one pick slightly out of tune with everything else you see, all of a sudden you're like, well, that means they'll be available at number 6 or number 8 or whatever it is that comes up. So it'd be exciting. And I mean, for Giants, all of a sudden be one of the most must watch teams, wouldn't they, in terms of sort of, you said, really fun defense, loads of really exciting players on that side, even with the loss of Dexter Lawrence, but then also in attack with Jackson Dart leading the way, him having another weapon with his own running, and then a fairly strong running back core already. It should be really good to watch. And I'm a big fan of Isaiah Likely. Again, he's one of those that goes on runs, and from a fantasy perspective, where you pick him up and he can be great for a month or so whenever Andrews wasn't in play too much. But then he just would always disappear whenever it was sort of the big games, or sort of towards the tail end when they just lean back into what they knew with Mark Andrews. So, but I think he's really intriguing as a tight end, and again, I'll definitely be interested to see where he starts going in the sort of draft. Again, I don't expect him to be a high draft pick and such, but just whereabouts in the tight end run he starts to come out.
To be honest, I was still reeling from the fact that you assigned me the Cleveland Browns in our mock draft. So when Andrew plucked out Carnell Tate for the 5th pick, I had him ready for my 6th pick. So I was like, God, what am I doing here? So if we roll through the next few picks, we've got Carnell Tate to the Cleveland Browns, as per Fantasy Pros' consensus. I actually selected Francis Noah here, as Tate was obviously off the board in the TSL mock draft. And I do think the Browns are desperate for an offensive lineman in this draft, with Monroe Freeling also mentioned as a potential pick, according to Fantasy Pros. Sonny Styles is mentioned here too. They've got one of Mansour Delane, Jordan Tyson, or Styles go to the Washington Commanders at number 7. Johnny went with Caleb Downs, who is still on our board. Marcos selected Ruben Bain Jr. to go to the New Orleans Saints at number 8, which is also the consensus pick. And he was followed by Mansour Delane to the Kansas City Chiefs, as selected by Drew. Spencer Fano was the consensus pick for the Chiefs here. Any names stand out from that group, Jack? Perhaps Carnell Tate again, just depending on where he lands and the fit that he gets?
Yeah, I think Browns again. Browns seems as though if he's there, that's where he'll go, and obviously there he would immediately be the number 1 option. And I think from a fantasy point of view, that might get you a bit more excited than if he goes to the Giants, or somewhere that he's going to play potentially second fiddle and third, because we saw this year with a number of the rookie wide receivers and such, that again, situation does play a big part in terms of what their output, just regardless of how good a player they are and stuff. So I think if he goes to the Browns, and all of a sudden, he's probably jumping up a few spots in terms of where you might take in fantasy. Other options, well, there's just quite a few, is it, in terms of sort of needs really coming up there, and it's sort of interesting, like Washington again. I know that I've seen plenty of people think if Love did slip, then obviously he'd be a shoo-in to go there, but they've been linked with a couple of potential wide receivers, maybe. Ruben Bain Jr., who from all accounts is a real high talent, but he's got these legal potential issues that I think teams are saying that they've been aware of them and sort of across those. So he shouldn't drop too far. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where he goes because from all accounts, a really good player. And then Chiefs. I mean, just seeing the Chiefs draft this high just seems really crazy. Not through trade circumstances or anything, but just in terms of their sort of finish. So it'll be interesting because they definitely need weapons across the board, don't they, and such. And I think the consensus had sort of Spencer Fanu and again I think Jordan Tyson was sort of potentially linked there. So it'll be interesting, just to see exactly what they do as well.
Now, James, in our TSL mock draft, selected Sonny Styles to be heading to the Bengals at number 10, but that was before the trade with the Giants happened. The consensus has a 50% chance apiece between Styles and Peter Woods here, but I would be very surprised if the Giants burn both their first round picks on defensive players. I think you take Styles early if you want him, but this is where you then take an offensive player, and there seems to be a lot of talk around the Giants liking Jordan Tyson. What do you make of the Giants-Bengals trade deal? Who came out on top in that one? And what do you see from the Giants from an outside perspective in terms of how they select with their 2 early picks?
I think, again, it kind of came out the blue a little bit. Obviously, we knew he was up for trade and such, but there was some talk, and I think I was listening to NFL Daily or one of the podcasts, and they were sort of saying they might only get a second for Dexter Lawrence and such. So I think to get number 10 pick is really good work. I think that's a really good return. Ultimately, I think he's an amazing player and such. But if somebody wants to leave and the ball's sort of in their court, you can be a little bit scrambling. And I think to end up with 2 top 10 picks is good, especially in a draft like this where there seems to be a lot of talk that sort of there's maybe 12, 13 players that sort of are the tier 1, and then it's a drop off, and then a lot of players who are sort of similar standard, but maybe not sort of right at the top end and such, and maybe have more risks to them. So, it'll be interesting. Yeah, you'd think there'd obviously be a real clear plan in place to strengthen in both offense and defense using those, as you sort of say. It's sort of it would be a little bit surprising if it was just both defensive players and such. But again, it's obviously first season under a new regime. So we can't really go on sort of previous or sort of, kind of draft history or sort of, sort of longer term planning because it's going to be the first year. So it'll be interesting to see where they feel as though the immediate need is.
Yeah, I think just to build on that point, it's a massive void to fill. Dexter Lawrence was a really, really key player for us, obviously, but to get the number 10 pick for him, I don't know if we're listening to the same podcast or not, but the same thing I was hearing was that you're looking at a second rounder potentially for him, but to walk away with the 10th pick for Lawrence, I think they've done really well to come out of that trade deal, and hopefully it proves to be the case when whoever we pick.
Chance that they could trade, then use that number 10 and trade down and kind of keep picking up extra picks, do you think, or do you think there's players they've got in mind that they're really hoping to get?
Yeah, I wouldn't rule it out. I think Joe Shane kind of alluded to that as well in his press conferences and whatnot. He's not closing the door on trading down and getting more picks. Depends whether he's actually running the show. John Harbaugh and his crew coming in, they may have more of a say. But yeah, I personally, I think you've accrued these 2 big picks. I think you just take the top talent that's on the board for me and hope that they can plug them in and be impact players. But yeah, we'll have to see. It'd be interesting. At number 11, we've got your Miami Dolphins, and the consensus is actually split across 3 players here, with Francis Marinoa, Jermod McCoy, and Jordan Tyson all touted. Marinoa is currently the favourite there, but James in our TSL draft went with Jermod McCoy. Which of those gets your vote for a position of need, or do you have a dark horse in mind that could potentially come into contention here?
Yeah, I really like. So obviously I didn't pick for our Dolphins and such. I think we're in a position. We've obviously got quite a lot of draft picks and such, and we seemingly have needs at every position basically. So it's kind of best player up is sort of where I would feel. And I think like I was alluding to earlier, it's sort of it'll be interesting which way it plays out in terms of if everybody's going where we expect them to, and then it's kind of a case of which of these top 12 players or so is left and us taking them. But Jeremy McCoy, I think Mansour Delane, again, I think they'd probably be my first picks, I think, for what we could really do with. And I think with the coaching staff that we've brought in, Hatley was sort of a defensive led coach previously and especially worked out on the backs. So I think that would play to his strengths, and kind of getting him a player that he can really use as a building piece for what he wants to do on that side of the ball would be good. But yeah, I'm open to, as I sort of say, kind of what player is available and going for the best talent there that we can.
Up next at number 12, we've got Jamie selecting Akeem Mesidor to go to the Dallas Cowboys in the TSL mock draft. Along with Caden Proctor and Sonny Styles, that trio are touted as most likely to be going to the Cowboys by the consensus draft, although it is hard for me to see Styles being still on the board at this stage, given the number of teams that he has been linked with. Perhaps we'll discuss this shortly in terms of the Cowboys. I think they are one of the teams that have been heavily touted as trading up this year, so we'll see if that materialises. The next one is a really interesting one for me, Jack. Lewis picked wide receiver Mekhi Lemon to go to the LA Rams, and he is the 75% consensus pick to land in Los Angeles. It would see Sean McVay add another receiving weapon to that offense, alongside Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams, which just sounds insane on paper. It also future-proofs that department as well with a young talent, an absolute dream for Matt Stafford in the short term. I'm guessing Lemon to the Rams is probably one that excites you as well.
Yeah, definitely. He certainly seems one of the most exciting players in terms of from an offensive position. He's sort of obviously a wideout, but he's just built. He just looks stocky and powerful. Plays really aggressively. A little bit like Puka. A little bit. I've seen loads of clips of him bouncing people or sort of yards after the catch and territory. So he seems great, and all sort of reporting does seem as though the Rams are going to definitely be looking to fill out that wide receiver room. I think as we previously mentioned last week, didn't we, sort of slight question marks over Puka, but obviously Devontae might not have too many years. So again, I think it'd be wise short-term and long-term planning for them. But he seems really exciting. Again, when I first saw sort of the clips and watched a report on him, I was like, well, this guy looks like a top 10 prospect and such, but there seems as though there's a few question marks about some comments he's made or an interview he did, which I haven't seen. So I won't comment on them myself and stuff, but he looks really sort of exciting, and those sort of links to that sort of Amon-Ra St. Brown that he seems to get quite a lot are really sort of appealing, because Amon obviously went a lot lower in his draft, but we've just seen how effective he is, and if you can get that sort of consistent player, then yes, it's like finding gold, isn't it? So I think that makes all the sense in the world. It'd be interesting if he's not on the board, and as we sort of expect, Garnell Tate isn't either, whether or not then they just go for another wide receiver, if it is a Jordan Tyson who seems to be the number 3, or potentially they look at a slightly different body like a Denzel Boston or someone like that. So if it is wide receiver or nothing for them, or again, if they potentially get really aggressive and try and draft up to kind of get the number 1, and as we sort of mentioned, the Garnell Tate. So Rams are a really interesting one to watch, I think, in the draft.
Not to suggest that this is something that they're going to do, but I've just looked at their depth chart and I've just seen that Stetson Bennett, the 4th, is the 2nd in behind Matt Stafford at quarterback.
Yeah.
When that screams a problem for me if Stafford gets injured. You don't think they're going to get majorly aggressive in terms of getting a quarterback in this draft, do you?
I've heard it. I've heard that, again, there obviously doesn't seem like there's loads of quarterbacks in play and such, but Ty Simpson is one. But yeah, I've heard something about them trying to get clever, and they are just one of those organizations that are quite annoying for a lot of other teams looking out, and that they do think outside the box. They do seem to come up with stuff where you're like, how have they done that, or how have they landed that person or drafted that person, and all the rest of it. So they need to do something at quarterback. Again, I don't know whether or not they would look at Anthony Richardson or sort of one of these lesser players at another team that's clearly not going to have a role and such, whether or not that might be the route to go, just because of the draft issues, and especially like I think we were talking about last week in terms of if this is a sort of a one and done year almost with Stafford and potentially McVay and stuff, can they risk having just a second tier rookie quarterback as their backup? Does that suffice, as it were? So it'll be really interesting.
Or maybe Stetson Bennett is just that good. Who knows?
We're just yet to see it.
Yeah. I stepped in at number 14 and went with Alaya Vavenga Ioane going to the Baltimore Ravens. Akeem Mesidor, who would be off our board, and Kenyon Sadiq are names in contention here on the consensus mock draft. Sadiq is an intriguing one, Jack, to the Ravens, potentially a long-term replacement for Mark Andrews, having moved on. Isaiah Likely this off-season as well. Is that an avenue that you think they might explore, or is it the offensive line that really needs to be looked at here?
Yeah, I think they'll go lines. Kenyon Sadiq would be fun and such, but again, I would see them go more wide receiver than tight end, just with my limited Ravens sort of knowledge and such. But again, I think new coaches, anytime there's a new coach anywhere, it kind of feels like they go to the lines, isn't it? That's sort of where they tend to go first, because obviously they're new coaches for a reason. The teams have usually had some struggles, and again, I think people like to build that out first and then look at the sort of the shiny things out wide and whatnot. So I'd be surprised if they did go for Kenyon Sadiq. There's obviously is a requirement there. But I think there's some other tight ends that a lot of the draft experts seem to quite like further down. And so maybe something to visit in sort of later rounds.
Should he still be available? Adam A actually selected Sadiq to go to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers next at number 15 in the TSL mock draft. I've spooked for Cade Otton off the waiver wire in recent seasons. That seems to be a pretty good link up for Baker Mayfield, but potential for Sadiq to flourish with Baker there, Jack?
Yeah, it'd be exciting. Baker's one of those, anybody you've got receiving a ball, Baker's a good quarterback to have, sort of slinging it to them, isn't it? He's he takes shots, he plays risky, and Kenyon Sadiq, from all accounts, not quite the same build and such. I think he's a little bit, sort of thicker and maybe shorter than some of these guys we've seen coming out and flying in recent years and stuff, but really explosive and seems as though he can sort of get plenty of yards after the catch and stuff. So that'd be fun to see. But yeah, Otton, again, he's always looked like a player to me. He's always done moderately well for fantasy and stuff. So tight end, again, it's one of those, is in terms of a premium position and such. Do they just have more needs elsewhere?
The New York Jets are back on the clock at number 16, and Ben went with Omar Cooper Jr. in the TSL mock draft. The consensus agrees with him that the Jets will go for a wide receiver here. It's between Cooper Jr. and Denzel Boston. Jets looking to give Geno Smith a rookie offensive weapon. At number 17, the consensus suggests that the Detroit Lions will go offensive tackle with one of Monroe Freeling or Blake Miller. Lewis actually went with Spencer Fano here in our TSL mock draft. Seems like a sensible strategy to protect Goff and Gibbs, allow them to do their thing this season. At 18, Adam picked Emmanuel McNeil-Warren to head to the Minnesota Vikings, although the consensus is heavy on Dylan Tiedemann being the overriding favourite at 80% to be Minnesota bound. We can go through those names as well, Jack, but at 19, Robert selected Jordan Tyson to go to the Carolina Panthers. Consensus pick is defensive tackle Caden McDonald, but Tyson is a fascinating one, heavily linked with the Giants and many other teams, so he may go a little bit earlier, but your thoughts on him and any of the other names that I've just mentioned?
I think, Panthers would really do with another wide receiver. I've heard Omar Cooper Jr. kind of be described as the perfect fit for their offense and sort of what they're looking to do and being a number two with Tedero McMillan and such. But yeah, I really could see them going for a wide receiver. I think they're quite fun stage where they've had a big rebuild. They've done a lot in the trenches, and now they're kind of just starting to add those pieces to kind of really get them ticking and kind of start bringing everything together. So could definitely see them doing something at wide receiver. Jordan Tyson, again, from all accounts, was really highly sort of rated. It's just sort of injuries and sort of availability that sort of done his stock as much as anything. So someone's got to take a gamble, and again, you're obviously always hoping that those will pay off. So that'll be interesting. And Lions for me are, again, as you sort of said, are a really interesting one because it feels like they've been good for a long time now, but obviously it hasn't been too long since Dan Campbell's turned that all around and such. And they were everybody's team a year or two ago, and last year, we've seen them start to just drop off, and they've started to run into issues. And is that just depth? So it'll be interesting what they do to try and sort of correct that, because again, when you're sort of drafting and you're looking at the wideouts and obviously Jamal Gibbs and such, you want to know that they are going to be playing with their best players more often than not, because that's ultimately how you're going to get the best out of these players. So it'll be interesting to see where they feel as though the sort of weaknesses are and what they choose to address.
I worry for the Lions. I feel they came. I've got a little bit of a soft spot developed for them over the last few years. Just like I say, with the Dan Campbell factor, but just some of the offensive weapons they've got there, they kind of became my second team. I just feel like they had their window of opportunity the season before last, didn't take it, and I don't know. I just feel like there's concerning signs there for me that they may just be on the slide. We've got the Bears as well pushing on. It's not particularly optimistic about them this season.
Tough division, isn't it? Again, it's so competitive and so hard. And I know what you mean. It's sort of like the Niners have been decimated with injuries, but they always seem to overachieve. Whilst Lions just feel like they've underachieved. And again, I appreciate injuries are huge in that, and I'm sure Lions fans would be, calling me all sorts, saying there's obvious reasons and such. But it just feels as though every time I've just wanted to see something or see, kind of they haven't quite delivered. And again, I don't watch enough of them to know exactly why that is, outside of sort of star players and things. But it just, it feels as though I know what you mean. That the sort of momentum has sort of dropped off, hasn't
I
it?
think the loss of the coaches probably killed them as well, didn't it? With Ben Johnson.
Good point. Yeah, good point. That's really, especially with Ben Johnson as well. Because Dan Campbell yesterday or last year was sort of chopping and changing. Sometimes he was doing some play calling, sometimes he wasn't, and things, wasn't it? So it did get a little bit messy there for a bit.
It did indeed. So at 20, Dan had the Dallas Cowboys picking Keldrick Folk to bolster their defense. Denzel Boston, Colton Hood, and Avion Terrell are all mentioned here as possible candidates in the consensus mock draft. Do Dallas really need another wide receiver in Boston? You've obviously already got Pickens and CeeDee Lamb there. Are we confident that it's defense that they're going to be looking at?
Yeah, I'd be surprised as well, to be honest with you. I think sort of thinking, like we'll discuss later in terms of sort of potential teams who might be active and stuff. There's loads of talk of them sort of trading up and coming in to get one of the linebackers. I think there's loads of chat that they want that Micah Parsons replacement. I think they were a little bit in talks with Max Crosby, weren't they? I think they were sort of in and around that as a conversation, but obviously never quite got to the level and such. But yeah, I would be surprised if they weren't sort of really bolstering that defense now, because they've shown they can do it on offense. They've got the weapons, even like Jake Ferguson at tight ends. The solid running back room isn't the strongest, but again, where they're picking, they're not going to get a love and such. So probably aren't going to address that in the first round now. So yeah, I couldn't imagine them doing much more than sort of on the defensive side.
At 21, Graham has the Pittsburgh Steelers strengthening their offensive line with Monroe Freeling, who might go earlier, but Ioane is the consensus pick, which gives us insight into which direction Pittsburgh are likely to go. At pick number 22, Bryce tipped the LA Chargers to select Blake Miller. Health dependent, I think the Chargers might feel good about that area of their roster. So it's Caleb Banks or Keldrick Folk for them in the consensus mock. I just think with Slater, Alt, they've got a strong offensive line already. So do you see the Chargers dipping into that market again to shore things up further, or is there another area of their team that you think they should be looking at?
I think they're quite a hard team to predict, the Chargers, aren't they? They're one of those where, again, they're sort of, they're quite tricky to pick out. So I think they've obviously got needs. I would have thought they'd be looking at more sort of defensive backs and such, but from my knowledge of them and such, but I could see, again, just when you rely so much on those trenches and such like they do, having depth, having options is always a good thing for them, and it's going to play to their strengths of how they're coached.
Now, this is a fun one. At number 23, Connor picked Ty Simpson to go to the Philadelphia Eagles. The consensus pick here is actually Blake Miller, who we just mentioned, but could Philly be looking for a replacement for Jalen Hurts or a long-term replacement if they go first round for a new quarterback?
That was spicy, wasn't it? That was really sort of interesting. Again, not something I'd seen before and such. He's so polarizing, isn't he, Jalen Hurts and such? Again, this is a Super Bowl winning quarterback who, again, has consistently delivered big plays. Obviously, the tush push has been a part of that. But he's, the Eagles have been so competitive now since he's been there as a quarterback. But yet, he just doesn't have the backing or sort of the confidence, it seems, from a lot of the fans and such. I think they find him quite frustrating. I think he's quite limited in his vision of the field, and it's sort of, you have to really play to his way of playing. And I think that's why AJ Brown and you don't really see the best of Devontae Smith. And again, the passing game has never been truly electric whilst he's been there. He's obviously great on his feet. He's again, from a fantasy point of view, he's a great quarterback from that side of things. So it was, it was an interesting, potential sort of throw up there. I think I'd be surprised if they went for that. But at the same time, the way Eagles do, they're so well run, and that they're sometimes thinking a couple steps ahead of everybody. It could be something to look out for.
At number 24, we have the Cleveland Browns selecting KC Concepcion, thanks to Neil. I think it makes a lot of sense, as they will need a new wide receiver, but is Concepcion the right guy, and will they wait this long and risk missing out on others? With the number 25 pick, Katie went for Zion Young to go to the Chicago Bears, and along with Cassius Howell, they are also the consensus picks, with the Bears seemingly looking to bring in an edge rusher. At 26, Kevin picked Malachi Lawrence to go to the Buffalo Bills to give their defense a boost. Cassius Howell features here again, as does Keldrick Folk. There are two names being paired with the Bills, and so that seems to be the way that they'll go. At number 27, Cav had the 49ers picking Caleb Lomu. Now, this was an interesting one for me. I really liked this one on Saturday, as I could see it being a succession plan for Trent Williams, with major doubts over his future as contract talks seem to be rumbling on. But it was reported this week that he has now agreed a new 2-year deal with the Niners. And so the question now for me is, do they stick with this plan or do they look elsewhere? Now, KC Concepcion is actually the clear consensus mock draft pick here. And while I agree that the Niners could do with future-proofing their wide receiver room, is that the right call here, or do they stick with their original plan or touted plan and look for a long-term replacement for Trent Williams?
Well, actually, it was me who picked Caleb Lowe, because Cav ruled himself out and put himself on automatic pick. So I stepped in because I didn't get to do any of the Dolphins pick. So I went for him, and it was exactly that reasoning, like you mentioned, with Trent Williams. So that news is why mock drafts can look silly sometimes, because, again, things change all the time, don't they, up until draft day. So, wide receiver would be interesting. I think it would be, again, I don't know what the latest is with Brandon Ayuk. Is he still on the books?
He's on the books, but by all accounts, he's absolutely not going to be a 49er when the
which was so weird, wasn't it? He was so good that one year, sort of, again, both in real life and for fantasy. But so that leaves you with Ricky Pearsall. Who else? Remind me that. Oh, they obviously got
Mike Evans, and Christian Kirk as well.
Yeah. So, I'll be interested, really, see what they do there. But if they could somehow get KC Concepcion, who again seems like one of those that a lot of teams might want to take earlier because there's loads there to like, but it's just a few too many question marks. I think if you're getting him sort of real tail end of this first round, from all accounts, that could be a really exciting pick.
At 28, Ollie has the Houston Texans selecting Caden McDonald, so that's more talent on that already formidable Texans defense. I think the question I would ask here, Jack, is do they need something on offense more as a priority in this draft? I'm not quite sure what the recovery timeline is with Tank Dell, but that was obviously a really serious injury that he suffered. CJ Stroud had his struggles last season, and question marks have been raised over him. He didn't cover himself in glory. Is this a pick where you look more so to give him something extra, or do you continue to focus in on that defense and make it even more of a nightmare?
Yeah, it seems unfair, doesn't it? If they do just keep going defensive football wins games, doesn't it? That's what a lot of people say and sort of swear on. So, and again, when you're close to being, an all-time great defensive outfit like they are, constantly adding to that, again, you can kind of get by with a middling offense, but they've not even been that, have they? That there has been a real struggle. CJ Stroud really looked like an elite player, didn't he? Was it rookie year? And sort of everybody was really excited for his step up, and it just hasn't quite happened. And I think so much so that there was sort of a bit of trade rumors, and is he their guy? But I think they were quite quick to sort of say, yeah, he definitely is, and they're backing him. But Tank Dell was a huge reason for that, for that sort of first year. So again, him kind of finally trying to get a season under his belt, sort of a full season, because it's just been so unfortunate on his end for the last couple of years and stuff. So I'd like to see them go offense because, again, that's what I like teams to sort of put out on the field. Again, everybody loves a strong defensive outfit, but ultimately in this fantasy game, we want points and we want point scoring and such. So they've got to address it at some point. But again, you're at a stage of the draft where other players you're picking here much different to the ones that you might be able to feel sort of positional value in the second round or sort of second day and such. So it'll be interesting.
Do you have any long-term worries over CJ Stroud? Or do you just think it is part of his sort of development and he's bound to have sort of an off period/season? But do you back him to be a consistent scorer fantasy-wise? Obviously from our perspective, but just in general as a player, do you expect him to bounce back and sort of have a good season this year?
It's always hard, isn't it? Because I think when a player shows a certain amount of ability, you've seen it. So it's like the evidence is there of what they can do. So in your head, you're like, well, that's who they are. But this has been a prolonged period now. It's certainly outweighed the good, as it were. And you hear mixed sort of reports where some people are sort of saying the tape's not as bad as a lot of people are sort of saying, and the offensive line has been trashed for ages. So he's not actually getting the opportunity. Personally speaking, I think he'll come good. I do think he'll come good. I think I don't know. I don't know if it's the style he plays. And again, sort of the Texans, sort of that year where he's, his deep ball and everything like that, and his vision of the field and things. I just think it looked, elite. And I think if you've got that, if you can get the right weapons and such, we've seen a lot of lesser quarterbacks, thinking of people, even in recent years, I think sort of your Baker Mayfields or people of that nature sort of grow into the league, kind of find their role, as it were. They've had to move teams to do it, and I don't think CJ will need to do that. I think it's more about the Texans sort of finding the sort of platform for him to be able to show. So, I think he's got the ability. I do think he's got to bounce back, but if he doesn't this year, because he's got to be coming towards the end of his rookie contract and stuff, it will be really interesting, because for a long time it was sort of like, give him the max and make him one of the top paid quarterbacks without any thought. But now you're sort of considering, well, if you were to rank the quarterbacks, he's probably somewhere in the middle at the moment, which is quite interesting. So I think he'll come good, but I think that is just a bit of bias for just believing in what I saw that first year.
Yeah, I think some of the throws were wild last season from him. I was just sat.
Yeah. How many times were we talking on a Sunday and you're like, I cannot believe he's just done that?
Exactly. But no, I do agree with you. He said he's shown the talent, and I do expect him to bounce back in some form this season. With the 29th pick, the Kansas City Chiefs select Mason Thomas, thanks to Allen. That's another defensive player off the board. The consensus mock draft has the Chiefs going for a cornerback, one out of Colton Hood or Avion Terrell. At 30, we stepped in here for you, and thanks to Kevin and James, who both put Denzel Boston forward as your Miami Dolphins pick. The consensus mock draft actually has quarterback Ty Simpson in the equation here, which is quite the surprise. What's your thoughts on if Boston is your guy and he gets drafted by the Miami Dolphins here? And does Ty Simpson come into the equation at all for you?
I don't think Simpson is. I haven't seen any, as to sort of say now, I'm kind of a little bit involved with various Dolphins focused podcasts and groups and stuff. And I don't think I've seen Simpson come up at all. Obviously we've just gone for Malik as your number one. And I think we're quite happy with our depth at number, as a backup as well. So I would be shocked for him. But yeah, Denzel Boston would be a great shout. I think, again, if he's available, I think wide receiver, it's one of those. It is one of the, because obviously with Waddle going out, our room looks pretty atrocious on paper. So I know a lot of Dolphin fans are obviously keen to see how we address that. I think my thinking is we might go to it more in maybe the third round. We've got a lot of third round picks. I think we've got 4 in total. So I could see us maybe doubling up and taking a few shots at that sort of stage. But I think if a Boston or, again, one of these other sort of top 5, top 6 wide receivers was still somehow on the board, then I think you go grab them. So that'll be really interesting.
Jack going to war with Fantasy Pros mock drafted. With pick number 31, the New England Patriots select Jeremy Bernard to give Drake May another offensive weapon. Caleb Lomu actually emerged as a consensus pick here, but I do feel as though another wide receiver could be the play over another lineman. And finally, with the 32nd pick of the TSL mock draft, the Seattle Seahawks select Avion Terrell, courtesy of Dan. Now, while I do agree that they do have holes on defense, and adding a cornerback does make sense as they rebuild and try and go again after last season's success, surely the play here is that they'll go running back to help fill the void left behind by Kenneth Walker after his departure to go join the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think they're going to go with Jadarian Prince here. But what do you think? Do you think a move on the defense is the call, or do you need to go and get another running back?
It's a big hole, isn't it? I think Zach Charbonnet is a good running back and such, but he hasn't always stayed fit and sort of been available. So they're going to need to do something there. We've had a few years of really strong running back rooms, haven't we? Or sort of rookies and such. And this one doesn't seem quite to be the same class. So whether or not you can use your first round pick on that, I don't know. I think Seahawks are sort of at a bit of a stage where you got to trust them a little bit. They've been so well run this past year or two. I think, again, like you said, they've lost a few players that I think they have managed to hold on to a lot. So I think they're certainly coming back as one of the favourites, and it's just sort of plugging those gaps where they need it. I think they've got needs, but maybe unlike Miami and lots of other teams, there's not sort of, essential. You have to choose someone here. I maybe don't see that quite as much for them.
So that concludes the 2026 TSL mock draft. Thank you to all of you for your input in making it happen. We appreciate it. The other thing me and Jack wanted to do at this stage was just to go through the rookies and take away the team needs and just focus in on pure talent. Who are the best players in this draft class? Now, Jack, who particularly stands out for you, having gone through that mock draft now? Who are the candidates that will potentially emerge as the top fantasy rookies? And particularly with us, with our dynasty leagues, take that into consideration as well. Which are the names that are standing out for you?
Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Lovett are clearly the two top picks there, and sort of where they end up is so intriguing, and it's going to be, I think it could really fluctuate sort of where they're picked in terms of the short term. I think, as I say, Carnell Tate at the Browns, I think whilst they have the issues in the quarterback room, and I don't know if we still have much of a clear picture of exactly what's going to go on there, being a wide receiver one, so obviously from day one, you can be pretty excited about taking him, especially with his age and all the reports that are coming out there. So that's really cool. Love. Yeah, it does. It's not, I'm quite just intrigued to see the battle with him and Genty, because as I sort of say, I think Genty was coming out with so much hype. And to be honest, it feels like I'm hearing a slight narrative change with Love, where, again, I think I mentioned last week, the stuff I was reading and hearing was he's, an elite prospect, a fantastic running back who's kind of got all the tools and such, but he didn't seem as though he was being talked about as a potential generational one. Whilst the closer we get, that does seem to be the case. But I'm hearing people talking about more and more as the best player in the whole draft, and how he's going to be one of the best running backs from day one and things. And as I said, Genty obviously had a pretty similar hype last year, so I think that would be really interesting. Again, if I was selecting and I was desperate to go for a running back, late first round or sort of second round, and they're both there, it'd be interesting to see who you'd go for or who people are going to go for. So really intrigued to see who kind of comes off between them sort of first and such. And then, I think the other ones, again, it's hard because we haven't got particularly the quarterbacks to discuss. So it is sort of primarily, and I said tight ends, that there's only really the one sort of first round prospect in Kenyon Sadiq. So it is wide receivers and the running backs, isn't it? Wide receivers that are sort of the key topic that we're really looking at. So Jordan Tyson and Mekhi Lemon seem as though the next two in terms of sort of the rating. So I think Mekhi Lemon is the one for me, but just because that yards after catch, what he can do there, I think I could just see him getting more volumes and sort of being out on the field more. So definitely the obvious ones to look out for. But then you've got your Denzel Bostons and couple of these other people. Again, I think I mentioned if Omar Cooper, if he ended up at Carolina or the Panthers do take a second wide receiver, do take a wide receiver, you'd think their role would be pretty big from the off. And again, in an emerging team that's finding its feet a little bit offensively, that could be really intriguing. So situations is going to dictate it a lot. Again, Dolphins, if we did go for one, if Casey Concepcion ended up coming to 30, is there quite a clear route to being our number one receiver? There is, really. Again, you're looking at sort of the depth chart and things like that. Whilst, again, if somebody goes to a 49ers or sort of potentially one of these other teams, again, do you have to play the long game and because of that have to draft them quite a few rounds later? So it'll be interesting. I think a lot of talk has been that the sort of 6 wide receivers should definitely go in the first round, and some are saying in the top 20 25 that could happen. It'll be interesting how many of those are sort of selected in the top 6 rounds or so within a dynasty redraft or sorry, a dynasty startup and such. So yeah, there's plenty of players there to be excited about, and I think it's quite fun kind of going back a little bit to having quite a lot of wide receiver depth and kind of picking your poison, seeing what sort of player you like and who you might go for.
The 2-2 Atwell disrespecting that Dolphins by the way, but I'll forgive you. But yeah, no, I echo your sentiments. Jeremiah Love, obviously, standout name there, but that wide receiver group, there's a lot to look forward to. In terms of Love, do you see him? How high do you see him going in fantasy drafts, dynasty drafts?
I would imagine sort of tail end of the first, on the turn on the second. Just again going on sort of historical, I would be shocked if he made it past sort of midway point of the second round. I think I do think he's going to go high just because he is going to be a number one. He's got age on his side. Whilst the running back sort of fantasy sort of contingency, like we were talking about a bit last week, was in terms of there's quite a stable core there and stuff. You're going to go for a Love over a McCaffrey. You're going to go for a Love probably over a Barkley. You're going to go for a Love over quite a few of them, I think. You're probably not going to push quite as high as obviously your Robinsons and your Gibbs and such. But as I sort of say, him, Genty, a couple of the others, it will be really interesting to sort of see where exactly they come off. But I suppose thinking about the team, sort of what would be the worst team he could go to in terms of from a fantasy point, again, I couldn't see the Cardinals take him. Could the Jets take him? They've obviously got Breece Hall, but he's not there for the long time. He's been really sort of spotty with his output and such. But could the Jets take him? And again, that would be still quite exciting and such. Obviously, the Giants have been linked with him plenty. Browns, I don't think would go for him. Again, they went for Quinton Judkins, didn't they? And they had the other lad, sorry, name escapes me, who did quite well as well there. Washington, you think would take him. Saints, he could be a good Alvin Kamara. So it's one of those. He's not going to slip too far because you can kind of talk yourself into so that he could go and make a massive impact at pretty much most of the top 10 and such. So I think wherever he goes, he's a fairly safe bet, being quite a high fantasy pick.
Dylan Sampson was the one.
Dylan Sampson, yeah. Again, he just showed flashes of. Judkins had a few issues himself, but he had good output for year one, and I think Sampson was a nice complementary piece to that as well. So yeah, I don't think I said. Obviously, Las Vegas aren't going to take him. I don't think Cardinals would, just because of how many pieces they already have, and probably not the Browns, but everybody else certainly in the top 8. I think is probably taking him over a lot of people, other than maybe the Jets, who again obviously addressing a lot of issues and if an Arvell Reese or David Bailey are there, then you'd think they'd go there. But I don't know. I wouldn't be shocked if Love went second.
So let's talk trades briefly next. And we did, of course, see the Bengals and Giants make a trade this past weekend. Dexter Lawrence going to the Bengals in return for the 10th overall pick. We've touched on it from a Giants perspective. And although it is a massive void to fill, we did say that getting that 10th overall pick for Lawrence is really good business. But from a Cincinnati angle, I read something that was quite interesting today. So the argument put forward was that this could be seen as a move from them to really try and go for it this season and prove to Joe Burrow that they can compete before he starts looking at his options. Now, there's no secret about it. Their defense has been atrocious and such a glaring weakness for them over the last few years. But we know how fun their offense is. Joe Burrow at the helm, the wide receivers that they've got, the running back. They can put points up for fun, but they can't stop it going the other way. And complementary football and all that stuff, that ain't going to be a recipe for success. So does that make sense for you? And would it address a really important concern to try and help them turn into a legitimate contender?
Yeah, I think it's a great sign, and I think it's obviously Burrow wanted his wide receiver room sorted, and he seemingly had quite a few control. But obviously, with Trey Hendrickson leaving, they needed a marquee player on that side of the ball, and I think they've got that in Lawrence. And you said that they want Burrow coming onto the field not straight after a touchdown and not straight after points given away, which is what he's done so long. And it's interesting because Burrow, Chase, and such, because they're always in high scoring games, which is maybe quite a lot of why their fantasy output is quite so much. Chase has had these 50 pointers and all the rest of it. And it's quite often because they're in these mad games where it's just end to end and all the rest of it. So for Bengals, I think in the real world, it's the right thing to do, and certainly kind of just try and find that sort of consistency on the defensive side so that, again, they don't need to score 40 points to win a game. That obviously makes all the sense in the world. But I think from a fantasy point of view, there could be a small knock-on effect. Again, one player isn't going to do that on his own, but if it's a sign of things to come in terms of, like you said, to really sort of make a complementary roster, if that's maybe what they're looking at across the rest of the draft as well, they're they're a dangerous outfit. And again, Burrow is one of those players that I think is hard not to love. He's so good, and he's in his, he's coming into his prime now, isn't he? And everybody wants to see him really kind of in that MVP conversation and playing the biggest games that there are at the end of the season. So to see if he can really deliver and such. So I think it's a smart move from them. Obviously, like we said earlier, it seems a fairly high price, but when you're that close, that's what you got to do sometimes, just to kind of go out and get the sure thing.
I love the mayhem of the Bengals. That's such a good point that you've made there, that just the back and forths that they get involved in, having to put up points, like you say, when the defense isn't stopping anything. You're right. There's going to be a knock-on effect to the scoring that they have on that side of the ball. Looking elsewhere, AJ Brown is another name that's being heavily linked with moving on this offseason. It's been reported today again that the New England Patriots are the most likely destination for him. That's said to be one for post June the 1st, so we may have to wait a little while for that one to go through. But by the reporting today, it's likely that Brown will be with the Patriots before the start of the new season. That one seems to make a lot of sense for all concerned for me, Jack. I think there's a sense of unhappiness there in Philadelphia, so they get to move on without him. He gets a fresh start elsewhere. And that link up with Drake May is important for May. I think he needs another wide receiver weapon there. And I think that's going to have a positive knock-on effect for both players in terms of fantasy scoring. But AJ Brown to the Patriots, that one sound like a sensible one to you?
Yeah, it's easy to forget just how good AJ Brown is. To me, he's still right in the elite wide receiver. Obviously, maybe not quite there with your Chase and your Nakuas and Jacksons and such. Maybe not quite there, but he's certainly not far off. He's not past it. He's not at an age where you're really worried about a downfall. I don't think he's had massive behavioral issues. A few slightly weird social media posts, and he's liking to read books on the side all the time, is it? Things like that. But I think it's more to do with that. Philadelphia Eagles have just been a really strange outfit on the offensive side. So if he goes there, we saw what Stefan Diggs did there as a slightly more experienced wide receiver with Drake May, and I think that could be a mega sign. And it was interesting. Again, in the WhatsApp group, I was sort of dismayed that the Patriots are sort of back so quickly, and quite a few people were sort of pointing out actually they had such an easy fixture list last season, and again we're sort of found out towards the end, and Drake May was maybe carrying them a lot more, and actually they're missing a lot more than you think. So it'll be interesting to see what they do this year. They're obviously well coached last year, and I just think AJ Brown, as your top guy with a quarterback that's going to get you the ball, I think he's a really, really exciting prospect for both for fantasy and to see in the real world.
Mike Vrabel's got a few things on his mind at the moment, so if he's locked in on the draft this week. So the Eagles have also been paired with Jonathan Grenard of the Minnesota Vikings, but more from a fantasy perspective, the likes of Colts QB Anthony Richardson, Titans QB Will Levis, Saints QB Spencer Rattler, Falcons tight end Kyle Pitts, Giants edge Kayvon Thibodeau, and wide receivers Keon Coleman and Brandon Ayuk have all been touted for the trade block. And then just in terms of teams, you've got the Browns and the Cowboys who seem to have been mentioned the most in terms of being active and potentially moving up or down in the draft. Intrigued by any of those names, Jack, or teams heading into the draft and what they might do in terms of trade talks?
Yeah, there's not a lot of players, is there, sort of in the sort of conversations that are particularly, Ayuk. Again, I think unlike AJ Brown, there does seem like some real issues there and such. Again, he hasn't got the catalogue of output that AJ did, and such. Obviously, he had that one particularly good year, but someone will take a punt on him. So I'm sure he will end up somewhere, but I don't know. I think you'd have to see it before you kind of got particularly excited about that. Kyle Pitts, an interesting one again, sort of long. Sort of everybody's kind of hoped he's going to turn a corner, and he actually had a good year fantasy wise last year. I'd be a little bit surprised if he was to be moved on. I think after sort of probably his best year in a number since his rookie at least. But yeah, Keon Coleman doesn't do anything for me at all, and Anthony Richardson and Will Levis. I can't see a career resurgence like the likes of Sam Darnold and people that we've seen in recent times. So not a lot there. It's probably a bit more intriguing of who maybe moves up and down within the draft itself. I think, like I say, Cowboys and Browns have been linked. I've seen the Chiefs potentially linked and such. Rams, as I sort of say, potentially coming up to maybe try and grab the player that they really want and things. And again, even Dolphins, we've obviously got these picks, but do we potentially put some of these third rounds and do we come up and get, I don't know, it'd have to probably be for like a Caleb Downs or someone like that if we were worried he was going to go 6-7 or something like that. Do we come up and get someone if we just fall in love, if we think, again, he's a potential green jacket type player and such. So, I think it'll be more intriguing of where people maybe move to rather than sort of players on the move and such.
I think there's a few people in the Bills building that don't think too much of Keon Coleman as well, apparently.
Yeah.
So before we sign off, we thought it'd be a bit of fun just to discuss our own teams briefly and go with what would be a perfect early draft for us with the picks that the Giants and Dolphins have, respectively. For me, with the Giants, we've got the number 5 and number 10 overall picks, and then we're next on the clock in the second round at number 37. Now, let's assume that Reese, Bailey, and Love are all gone by the time it comes round to the Giants at 5. For me, I'd like to see them go with Sonny Styles. I think he looks like an absolute monster at linebacker. He's being touted as one of the best athletes and talents in this draft class. You pair him with a Tremaine Edmonds and that defensive unit, I think that just continues to add to making us a nightmare to play against. And I think he also suits what John Harbaugh has historically done with the Ravens and would be a really good fit with us. Then at 10, again, let's assume Carnell Tate is gone. There's been a lot of chatter over the past week that the Giants might go for Jordan Tyson, having acquired this pick. And Joe Shane is said to have cast an eye over him and is an admirer. It depends who's still on the board here again, but do we go with another defensive talent if Caleb Downs is still there and just take the next best player? Do we strengthen the O-line and protect Jackson Dart and the running backs with a Francis Mauigoa if he's still available? I think we've made some savvy moves this offseason to address some positions of need, so I'm inclined to pair Malik Neighbours with another dangerous wide receiver and go Tyson if the Giants really believe in him. Then you go and address the other needs in the later rounds with players that you can mould and improve. So Jack, just before we move on to the Dolphins, I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on what would represent an ideal 5th and 10th pick for the Giants, and say if they do go with Styles and Tyson, would that be sensible work from them?
Yeah, I think so. I think Styles, he's got so much hype, hasn't he, after his the workouts where he was just posting ridiculous numbers. And I think I've just pictured him in the Giants. I don't know why. That's the one in my head that I think that's who you will get at number 5. And yeah, I really don't know why that is, but he's the one that I think. So yeah, from all accounts, he just such an exciting prospect. And yeah, I love the idea of sort of building out. Obviously, Wandale was a weapon last year and such, but the idea of you having 2 potentially really sort of young, exciting wide receivers to go with, as we mentioned earlier, a strong running back room. If not elite, again, obviously Scatterboo's going to come back from this injury, and whilst he was fun and exciting, he's clearly not sort of a top tier running back, but a strong enough punch there for now. And then Jackson Dart, yeah, we can see what he does. So I think that'd be yeah, really good use of the picks if that's the way you went.
And then finally, hit me with your Dolphins picks as you begin this rebuild under Jeff Hafley. Who do you hope to see the Dolphins pick up in the draft?
Yeah, again, like you sort of say, I think there's anybody of that top 12 is kind of going to improve us. So I think it's going to be who's sort of there. Some people said Ruben Bain may drop down to you or down to that sort of level. Some people have, kind of said anybody could, again, I even saw one where it was Sonny Styles kind of getting down to that level. So obviously you're going to take sort of, I think with 11, I think you just take best player on board. I don't think we'll go for a wide receiver there just because I think Kyle Tate will be gone. And I don't think we'd go for one of the others from our list. Mekhi Lemon has probably been the most widely linked wide receiver there. But for me, Caleb Downs, there's just something in my mind that I just really like the idea of him. Everything I've sort of read about him and seen of him, he just looks like a pro. He just looks like someone who's going to come in, be a leader from day one, strengthen that room. Again, might not be the greatest player in the world in his position, but is probably going to be an all pro and sort of get to Pro Bowls and things like that. So Caleb Downs, if he somehow slipped down to that sort of level, I think would go. Francis, I'm always going to butcher his surname as such, but I think it's Maui Noah, isn't it? There's no G, the silent G. Francis Maui Noah, obviously being a Miami guy, I think if he was to fall, those two would probably be my standout picks. But then Mansour Delane, I think Jermel McCoy seems like a more realistic. That's again, the injury is a little bit worrying, but I think if Mansour Delane fell, that would be good there. And that will probably dictate, as I sort of say, then at 30, I think you can kind of get a little bit more interested in wide receiver. We're picking again at 43. So it's, again, a little bit of, right, do you go wide receiver now if there is somebody there who maybe you weren't expecting to be in terms of, maybe a Casey Concepcion somehow sort of does fall down to that sort of level, or potentially that's the Boston was there. Or again, somebody I think at that level, I think we might go for wide receiver, which would be interesting. And then again, because we need positioning everywhere, it's sort of who else may be available then when it comes to sort of that early second round and such. So again, I've seen sort of various names sort of linked with us and stuff. I think if Zion Young was there, that would be really exciting. But I think this is where the intrigue of this draft is. I think the top, as I keep saying, there's a tier 1 list that everybody is kind of mocking in and around that sort of top 12, maybe slightly to top 15. But I think that next sort of 35, 40, there just seems like there's so much variance and so much sort of, people sort of putting different people on different teams and all the rest of it. So it's going to be really, really intriguing. We've got to get a wide receiver at some point. But as I say, we do have these 4 round 3 picks. So again, whether or not we might package up 2 or 3 of those and come back into the second and just kind of go, right, let's get a slightly higher wide receiver there, or do we take a punt on a couple round 3ers? It'll be interesting. But I think, as I say, dream scenario for me, certainly with the number 11, is if a Caleb Downs, Mansour Delane, I think those 2 would be probably the ones I'd be most excited about that might have a realistic chance. And then, Francis Noah, and again, I think you're happy with him if you get him there.
Are you looking forward to this sort of rebuild, or like in terms of balancing the dread of maybe this being a really hard slog this season? So, like from my perspective, I'm cautiously optimistic as to what the Giants are going to produce this season. But you're going through quite a significant rebuild now, new coach as well. Are you optimistic about the process of how you're going to get to where you want to be, or are you just preparing yourself for a really hard slog this season?
Well, I have the benefit that many Dolphins don't, of that I'm new to it. Again, I think they've kind of seen it. They've felt the pain. They've had the false promises and the false dawns all before and such. Plus, for me, it's just quite exciting because, again, I'm going to kind of go on this journey with the team from the start almost. Again, so I think from my perspective, it's a great way to sort of really learn about the players, learn the philosophy, learn sort of what these new coaching staff and GMs and everything are thinking, and kind of, really build my knowledge of the team up that way. I think if I was coming into it and it was a really settled roster and such, that was just a bit useless, then again, it's a bit like, oh, well, what's the point of finding out? Whilst again, it's going to be quite fun that again, whoever we draft at 11, okay, that's going to be a bit of a centerpiece and things. So I'm quite hopeful. I think I can't see the Dolphins from where we're at sort of being like a tank merchant. I don't think the Dolphins have particularly been that for a long period of time. And so whilst we're not going to necessarily be a winning roster next year, I think that there will hopefully be some exciting steps. And again, I think, as I sort of said, we've got 7 picks within the first 3 rounds. That's quite exciting, as young players there, so, young things to look out for. And again, whilst they're not all going to come in and be day one starters and things, there's a lot of intrigue. So again, I don't know how it will all shake out, but Malik Willis, I think, was as good as we could do in the quarterback. And I think that's quite intriguing, quite exciting, albeit on a small sample size. Obviously, Devon Ajane's still there as sort of our franchise piece and things. And then we've got a bit on the defensive side, but obviously we need to strengthen there. So, I'm quite optimistic for a enjoyable year, not a good year. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Trust the process, Jack. Trust the process. Yeah. So that is a wrap on this episode of the Sunday League podcast. We hope you've enjoyed it and you'll stick with us through the course of the season for plenty more NFL fantasy football chat. We'll have draft day reaction coming next week. Our positional ranking discussions will get underway with a look at the running backs to start, as well as all the latest NFL news. Our first league draft is slated for the first weekend of May, and from that point onwards, we'll have deep dives into how those went with analysis and guest reactions. In the meantime, please do give this episode a like or leave a positive review if you've enjoyed it. Please subscribe. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever else you get your podcasts. And you can follow us across all social media at Sunday League NFL. Quick reminder, if you're listening and you want to get involved in our community of NFL fantasy football fans based in the UK, and you want to join a future league in our network, please email us at sundayleaguenfl@gmail.com. Jack, any final thoughts before we sign off?
No, enjoy it, everybody. I know plenty of people within our competition are going to be staying up late to watch it live. I tend to wake up the next day and kind of catch it all on catch up, but enjoy it, whatever you're doing for it. As I sort of say, is exciting times, and just starts getting your mind ticking a little bit about fantasy as well, and kind of starting to have that and maybe slightly different changes in strategies and all the rest of it. So no, really excited to see how we do and reporting back on the next pod.
Good stuff, mate. So happy draft day, everyone, for Thursday. Happy draft preparation. We hope we've helped your decision-making in some way. Not too much if you're in the same leagues as us, but that is it from us for now, and we'll catch you next week.